The intercom buzzed at 7:18 on a quiet Tuesday morning. I remember the exact time because I had just poured my second cup of coffee, and the house was still unfamiliar enough that every sound made me pause. 6 months earlier, I hadn't even known this place existed. Now it was mine. Paid in full. Quiet street. Two-car driveway. Small patch of grass still trying to recover from winter. The intercom buzzed again. Most people don't use intercoms anymore. But when I bought the house, I installed one myself. Old habit. After everything that happened, I preferred knowing who stood outside my gate before opening anything. I walked to the small panel by the kitchen wall. The coffee was still steaming behind me. I pressed the button. Yes. There was a pause. Not the normal kind. Not someone adjusting their phone or checking the address. A long, uncomfortable silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 6 months. It's me. My fingers tightened against the wall. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stepped to the window beside the sink and pulled the curtain just enough to see the gate. The early sunlight hit the metal bars, and for a moment, I only saw her silhouette. Then she stepped forward. My ex-wife, standing outside my new house. The same woman who smiled in court and told the judge I was financially irresponsible, emotionally unstable, and incapable of rebuilding. The same woman who walked away with the house, the savings, the car, and most of the furniture. The same woman who leaned toward her attorney and whispered something that made them both smirk when the final judgment was read. She looked different now. Not dramatically, but enough. Her hair wasn't styled the way she used to keep it for court appearances. Her coat looked expensive, but wrinkled, like she'd slept in it. One hand gripped her phone. The other rested flat against the metal gate. She looked smaller, tired, and something else. Uneasy. I pressed the intercom again. Who is this? I asked calmly. Another pause. Daniel. I kept my voice steady. I don't know a Daniel. She exhaled sharply. Come on, Mark. This isn't funny. I watched her closely. Her eyes moved, scanning the house, the driveway, the quiet street. She wasn't here confidently. She wasn't here like someone returning to reclaim something. She looked like someone who had already been turned away somewhere else. You shouldn't be here, I said. She leaned closer to the intercom speaker. I need to talk. That phrase. 6 months earlier, those same words had cost me almost everything. I don't think we have anything left to talk about. Her jaw tightened. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important. I looked past her toward the street. No car. No luggage. Just her. That was my first real clue. My ex-wife never traveled light. Even for short trips, she'd bring 2 bags, backup shoes, extra makeup, and documents in neat folders. Now she stood outside my gate with nothing but her phone. Another silence stretched between us. Then she said something that made my stomach shift. I went by the old house first. Of course she did. The house she fought to keep. The house she told the court she needed for stability. The house she insisted I couldn't maintain. I didn't respond. I thought you'd still be struggling, she added quietly. I let that sit there. Then I said, you shouldn't have come. Her voice softened. Mark, please. Just 5 minutes. I looked at her again. 6 months earlier, she had walked out of our marriage with a level of certainty that still echoed in my head. She didn't just leave. She dismantled everything carefully, methodically. She knew what she was doing. And now she was standing outside my gate at 7:18 in the morning. Alone. I pressed the intercom again. You said I'd never recover. I reminded her. She didn't answer. You smiled when you said it. Her shoulders dropped slightly. I was wrong. That was the second clue. Because my ex-wife never admitted she was wrong. Not casually. Not quietly. And definitely not from outside a gate. I looked down at the control button. I didn't open it. Instead, I asked a question that mattered. What happened, Daniel? She hesitated. Long enough to confirm something was very, very wrong. Then she said quietly, I lost the house. And suddenly, the morning didn't feel quiet anymore. Because if she'd lost the house, then something had gone very wrong. And my ex-wife didn't lose things by accident. Not unless someone else had played the game better. And I had a feeling. I already knew who that might be. I didn't open the gate. Not yet. I lost the house, she repeated. like saying it twice might make it less humiliating. I leaned my shoulder against the kitchen wall and watched her through the thin gap in the curtain. The morning sun had shifted just enough to show her face clearly now. She looked exhausted, not emotionally dramatic, not crying, just drained, the kind of tired that settles behind the eyes after weeks of stress and poor sleep. "How?" I asked. She hesitated again. That was new. Daniel never hesitated when explaining things. She used to correct waiters, argue with contractors, challenge bank representatives, all without missing a beat. She liked control, precision, certainty. Now she looked down at her shoes before answering. There were some changes. That wasn't an answer. Changes don't take a house, I said calmly. She shifted her weight. The payments went up. Another half answer. The house payments hadn't been variable. I'd negotiated that mortgage myself. Fixed rate, 20-year term. I remembered sitting at the bank, Daniel scrolling her phone, while I asked questions about penalty clauses and escalation protections. There shouldn't have been any surprises, unless something else had changed. When did this start? I asked. About 3 months ago. 3 months. That meant she'd held on to it for half the time since the divorce. Then something collapsed quickly. Did you sell? I asked. She shook her head. No. Foreclosure. Her jaw tightened. Yes. That word hung between us. Daniel had fought brutally to keep that house. She told the court she needed it. Said moving would destabilize her professional image. Her lawyer argued the house was tied to her future growth. And now it was gone. That's fast, I said. She nodded slightly. They moved quickly. Banks don't move quickly without reason. Missed payments, debt stacking, secondary loans, something. I studied her coat again. Expensive brand, but the cuff was frayed slightly. One button missing near the wrist. Daniel noticed details like that. She never wore anything imperfect. Another small clue. What about your job? I asked. She hesitated. That was the third clue. I'm still consulting. Consulting. Not working. Not with the firm. Consulting, which usually means unstable income. Did you leave the firm? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. They restructured. That meant yes. Daniel worked at a mid-sized marketing firm. Stable salary. Bonuses. Predictable. Without that, the house would become difficult fast. I felt the pattern forming. Income down. Mortgage fixed. Lifestyle unchanged. 3 months later. Collapse. You still have the car? I asked. She shook her head once. Sold it. That was the fourth clue. Daniel loved that car more than she loved most people. Selling it meant pressure. Serious pressure. And the savings? I asked. Her silence answered that one. I stepped away from the window and leaned against the counter. My coffee had gone cold. Outside, she shifted again. Mark, I know how this looks. I didn't respond. But I'm not here for money, she added quickly. That made me look up again, because I hadn't mentioned money, which meant she knew exactly what this looked like. Then why are you here? I asked. She looked directly at the camera now. Because something else happened. Her voice was quieter, less controlled, and that made me more cautious. What else? She swallowed. I didn't just lose the house. She glanced down the street again, like she didn't want to say it out loud. Then she leaned closer to the intercom. I lost everything. That wasn't drama. It sounded factual, measured, which made it more concerning. I stayed silent. Then she added something that shifted everything again. And I think it was planned. I felt a slow, familiar tension settle in my chest. Daniel didn't believe in accidents when it came to money. If she was saying it was planned, then someone had positioned her. Someone she trusted. By who? I asked. She hesitated. And for the first time since she arrived, I saw something close to fear in her eyes. David. I frowned. David. Her brother. The same brother who testified in court about my emotional instability. The same brother who helped her pack my belongings into boxes before I even moved out. The same brother who told me, quietly, she's going to do better without you. I looked back at her through the curtain. She wasn't just tired. She looked shaken. I trusted him, she said softly. And suddenly, The morning became something else entirely. Because if David was involved, then this wasn't just bad decisions. This was strategy. And Daniel had just shown up at my gate after losing everything. I didn't open the gate, but I stopped pretending I wasn't listening carefully. Why would David plan anything against you? I asked. Daniel let out a slow breath, like she had already rehearsed this explanation in her head and still didn't know how to make it sound reasonable. Because I trusted him with everything. That wasn't surprising. David had always positioned himself as the responsible one in their family. Calm voice, neat clothes, firm handshake. He worked in finance, not at a major firm, but close enough that people assumed he knew what he was doing. During the divorce, he sat behind Daniel in court, quiet and composed, occasionally leaning forward to whisper something into her ear. I remembered how confident she looked every time he did. Trusted him how? I asked. She shifted her weight again, glancing briefly at the empty street. I needed help managing things after the divorce, she said. The house, the taxes, restructuring accounts, all of it. That tracked. Daniel handled day-to-day expenses, but long-term financial planning had always been my responsibility. Investments, insurance, mortgage terms, emergency reserves. She used to joke that I was boring with numbers. Until those numbers stopped protecting her. So you gave him access? I asked. She nodded once. Limited at first. Then more. That was the fifth clue. How much more? She hesitated again. Joint oversight on a few accounts. Temporary power to move funds if needed. I closed my eyes for a second. Temporary power. That's how it usually starts. Did you sign documents? I asked. Yes. Without a lawyer? Another silence. Yes. I stepped away from the intercom and ran a hand across the back of my neck. Daniel had fought me aggressively during the divorce, insisting on legal precision for everything. She reviewed every clause, every line, every comma. But with David she signed. That told me something important. This wasn't just trust. This was dependence. What happened 3 months ago? I asked. She looked up again. He said the market was shifting, that I needed to move some funds quickly to protect liquidity. That sounded like David. Confident, urgent, just technical enough to discourage questions. So you moved the money? She nodded. Most of it. The savings from the divorce, the emergency reserves, possibly even retirement funds. Where did it go? I asked. Short-term investment accounts. That's what he said. Did you see them? Yes. At first. At first. That phrase sat heavy. And then, her jaw tightened. They started fluctuating. Losses. She nodded. He said it was temporary. Of course he did. They always say that. I watched her carefully now. And the mortgage. She looked down again. I used credit to cover it. That was the sixth clue. Debt covering debt. A slow spiral. For how long? About 6 weeks. And then, her voice dropped. The accounts were locked. I felt a shift immediately. Locked accounts meant something formal, not just bad investments. Why? I asked. He said there was an audit, compliance review, temporary freeze. I exhaled slowly. And you believed him. She didn't answer, because she had. Then what? Her eyes looked glassy now, but she still didn't cry. I got a letter. What kind of letter? From the bank. That was where things usually collapsed. What did it say? Her voice tightened. The accounts had been transferred. I straightened. Transferred where? I didn't recognize the firm. That was the seventh clue. And David. I called him. And, her lips pressed together. He didn't answer. The silence between us stretched again. How long? I asked. 3 days. 3 days was enough. Enough to disappear. Enough to restructure. Enough to close doors. What happened on the 4th day? I asked quietly. She looked up. He called back. And, her voice barely moved. He said the investments were riskier than expected. I shook my head slightly. That wasn't explanation. That was stalling. What else? I asked. She hesitated, then said something that made the entire situation darker. He told me not to panic, because he'd already moved the rest. My stomach tightened. The rest? She nodded. The remaining accounts. To stabilize exposure. I looked back at her. And did you authorize that? Her silence answered. No, I said quietly. She shook her head. No. And then, her voice dropped further. He stopped answering again. I stepped closer to the window now. She looked smaller than before. I drove to his office, she said. What happened? She swallowed. It was empty. That was fast. Closed, I asked. Vacant. I felt the last piece click into place. And that's when the mortgage payment stopped. She nodded slowly. I tried to sell things. The car. Jewelry. But it wasn't enough. And the foreclosure? She looked down. 2 weeks ago. I stared at her through the glass. The same woman who had stood confidently in court 6 months earlier, now standing outside my gate with nothing. Then she said the thing that changed everything again. And, Mark, I waited. Her voice tightened. I think you used your name. The room suddenly felt very quiet. My name? I asked. She nodded. I found documents after the accounts locked. What documents? She looked straight at the camera. Transfers connected to accounts that used your old financial profile. My pulse slowed. Not faster. Slower. Because that meant something deliberate. Daniel, I said carefully. What? Did you bring those documents? She nodded slowly, then lifted her phone. I took pictures. And for the first time since she arrived, I reached toward the gate control. I didn't open the gate fully. I unlocked the smaller side entrance instead. Old habit. Control the distance. Control the conversation. Daniel stepped inside slowly, like she wasn't sure she was welcome even after the lock clicked open. She glanced around the yard, the driveway, the house behind me. Not with judgment, not the way she used to, but with something quieter. Assessment, and maybe regret. She stopped about 6 feet from me. Up close, the exhaustion showed more clearly. Faint shadows under her eyes. Hair pulled back too quickly. No jewelry except the thin watch she always wore. Even her posture looked different. Less certain. I didn't invite her inside. Show me, I said. She nodded and unlocked her phone. Her fingers moved carefully, like she'd opened these images many times already. Then she turned the screen toward me. The first photo showed a bank document. Account transfer authorization. I scanned the header first. That's always where the truth sits. Institution name. Routing code. Transfer amount. Then I saw it. My old financial advisory firm. The same one I'd stopped using almost 2 years before the divorce. My name wasn't fully present, but my previous client ID was. And that wasn't something Daniel would even know existed. I looked up at her. How did you get this? I went through the email confirmations, she said quietly. They were forwarded to an account David told me to use. I nodded slowly. That meant David had visibility over her communications. Control. Layered. I looked back at the screen. The transfer amount made my jaw tighten slightly. It wasn't just savings. It was most of what she'd walked away with in the divorce. You didn't question this? I asked. She shook her head. He said it was temporary restructuring. That word again. Restructuring. Professional enough to sound safe. Vague enough to hide anything. Scroll, I said. She moved to the next image. Another transfer. Different institution. Same pattern. Then another. And another. For transfers total. Spread over 5 weeks. Methodical. Careful. Not rushed. That told me something important. David hadn't panicked. He planned. I studied the timestamps. Late afternoon. Early morning. Midweek. He spaced them intentionally. Avoiding automatic fraud triggers. I'd done similar structuring years ago when reorganizing investments. Perfectly legal when done correctly. Dangerous when abused. Did you report this? I asked. She shook her head. I didn't know what I was looking at yet. Fair. Most people wouldn't. I handed the phone back. There's something else, she said. She opened another image. This one wasn't a transfer. It was a loan document. My name appeared more clearly here. Not fully forged, but referenced. A secondary verification profile, using my old financial history as credibility. My chest tightened slightly. Not panic. Recognition. This was getting more deliberate. Did you sign anything like this? I asked. No. Did you authorize David to use my information? Her eyes widened slightly. No, of course not. I believed her, because Daniel was many things, but she wasn't reckless with fraud. She preferred control. This wasn't her. How many of these are there? I asked. 7. That number landed heavily. 7 documents. 7 chances for damage. Did you check your credit? I asked. Her face tightened. Yes. And there were inquiries. I nodded slowly. That meant the trail existed. Paper always tells the truth eventually. I stepped back and looked at her carefully. Why come to me? I asked. Her answer came quickly this time. Because he used your history. And if this turns into something bigger, I didn't want you blindsided. I watched her for a moment. This wasn't manipulation. Not the way she used to. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She wasn't asking to come inside. She was standing in the driveway, tired and honest in a way I hadn't seen in years. You went to the police? I asked. She shook her head. Not yet. Why not? Her voice dropped. Because I'm afraid they'll think I was involved. That was a realistic fear. Shared accounts, signed permissions, family relationship. From the outside, it could look messy. You might still need to go. I said. I know. She paused, then added quietly. But before I did, I thought you should see it. I nodded slowly. That made sense. And then I noticed something else. Her hands, slightly trembling. Daniel didn't scare easily, which meant this situation had already escalated further than she was saying. Is there anything else? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes. That single word changed the air again. What? I asked. She swallowed. I tried to contact a firm listed in the transfers. And her voice tightened. They said the accounts had already been liquidated. I felt my pulse slow again. Liquidated meant final. Gone. When? I asked. She looked at the screen. 10 days ago. 10 days. Not long, but long enough. And Daniel, I said carefully. She looked up. Did they tell you where the money went after liquidation? She nodded slowly, and when she spoke, her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Yes. I waited. She held my gaze. It was moved into a holding account. Whose? Her answer came quietly. A company I've never heard of. I crossed my arms slightly. What's the name? She looked down at the phone. Then read it. And the moment she said it, something cold settled in my chest. Because I had heard that name before. And not recently, but just 2 weeks ago. When I signed the final paperwork for this house, I didn't react immediately. That's something I learned years ago. When something important lands, stay still first. Let your mind move before your face does. Daniel watched me carefully. You've heard of it, she said quietly. I nodded once. Yes. Her shoulders tightened. How? I walked past her slowly and sat down on the small wooden bench near the garage. The morning air felt colder than before. 2 weeks ago, I said, when I closed on this house. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The same company. Same name. She stepped closer. What kind of company is it? I looked at her. A holding company. Her expression changed. Not confusion. Recognition. Because holding companies don't exist for simple things. They exist to move money quietly, to isolate liability, to separate ownership. Who owns it, she asked. I don't know yet. That wasn't entirely true, but I wasn't ready to say more, because when I signed the paperwork, I remembered asking the realtor about the seller. It wasn't a person. It was an LLC. Clean. Recently formed. No long history. At the time, it didn't concern me. That's common with investment properties. But now it felt different. Mark, she said slowly. Are you saying? I'm saying the same company that received your money sold me this house. The words hung between us. She stared at me. That doesn't make sense. No, I said quietly. It doesn't. Unless. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Daniel, when David transferred the funds, did you notice how the company was registered? She shook her head. I only saw the name. Do you still have the document? She nodded quickly and handed me the phone again. I zoomed in. There it was. Registered 2 months ago. 2 months. Which meant it formed just 1 month after the divorce finalized. That wasn't coincidence. That was timing. And timing meant planning. Daniel, I said quietly, when did David start helping you manage things? She frowned slightly, thinking. About 5 months ago. 5 months. That meant before the divorce was even finalized. I looked up slowly. Before the court ruling? I asked. She nodded. Yes, why? I didn't answer immediately. Because something deeper was forming. A pattern. David advising her early. David gaining access. David positioning accounts. David creating a company. Then 3 months ago. Money starts moving. 2 months ago. Company receives funds. 2 weeks ago. I buy a house from that same company. I felt the weight of it settle slowly. This wasn't just theft. This was layered, calculated, and possibly connected to me. Daniel sat down beside me. What are you thinking? I spoke carefully. I think David didn't just plan to take your money. She looked at me. I think he planned where it would go. Her voice dropped. You think he used it to buy assets? Possibly. She swallowed. And you bought one. I nodded slowly, which meant something uncomfortable. If that's true, she said carefully, then your money may have partially paid for this house. The silence after that was heavy, the kind that makes you hear small sounds, distant traffic, wind against the fence, a dog barking 2 houses away. Daniel looked at the ground. I don't even know how to process that. Neither did I, because if David funneled her money into that holding company, and that company sold me this house, then I was sitting inside a structure built from betrayal, and possibly fraud. Mark, she said quietly. Yeah, does that mean legally? I shook my head slightly. Not necessarily. If the purchase was clean, I'm protected. But the money, that's separate. At least, that's how it usually works. But still, I stood up. I need to check something. I walked inside quickly, Daniel following halfway, but stopping near the door. I went to the office, opened the folder from the closing. Neat stack of documents. Loan confirmation, title transfer, seller information. I flipped to the seller page. There it was. Company name. Same one. Registered address. I froze, because the registered address wasn't corporate. It was residential, and I recognized it. I had seen it before. Not on paperwork, but in real life. I walked back outside slowly. Daniel looked up. What is it? I handed her the page. That's the registered address. She scanned it. Then her face went pale. I know that address. I watched her. Where? Her voice came out quietly. That's David's old townhouse. The air between us shifted again, because that meant one thing. David didn't just steal the money. He controlled the company directly, which meant he used her funds to build assets, and I had unknowingly bought one of them. Then Daniel whispered something that made everything tighten further. Mark. Yeah, he called me last night. I felt my focus sharpen instantly. What did he say? She looked up at me. He asked if I had contacted you. My stomach dropped slightly, and I said no. I nodded. Did he say why? Her voice lowered. He said if I came to you, things could get complicated. The quiet street suddenly didn't feel so quiet anymore, because that meant David was watching the situation, and he knew I existed in the equation. Then Daniel added one more detail. And Mark, I waited. He said he might come by today. I didn't answer right away. I looked past Daniel toward the gate. Quiet street. No cars slowing down. No unfamiliar movement. But the calm didn't feel comfortable anymore. What time did he say? I asked. He didn't, she said. Just today. I nodded slowly. That was deliberate. Vague timing creates pressure. Keeps people unsettled. Makes them reactive. David liked psychological advantages. He always had. I walked to the gate and checked the lock again. Then I looked at the street cameras I had installed 2 weeks earlier. Another habit formed after the divorce. I hadn't expected them to matter this soon. Daniel noticed. You installed cameras? Yes. She nodded quietly, like she wasn't surprised. You always prepared for things before they happened. I didn't respond, because 6 months ago, I hadn't prepared enough. I walked back toward the bench. Daniel, I need to ask something carefully. Okay. When David called, did he sound nervous? She thought for a second. No, calm. Very calm. That fit. Calm meant he believed he still controlled the situation. Did he ask where you were staying? She hesitated. Yes. And I didn't tell him. That helped. Did he ask if you still had the documents? Her eyes widened slightly. Yes. That told me even more. He wasn't just concerned about her contacting me. He was concerned about evidence. When you said no to contacting me, what did he say? I asked. She looked at the ground briefly. He told me. That's good. Mark doesn't need to be involved. I let out a slow breath. Of course he said that. Because if I wasn't involved, the paper trail might stay quiet. But now Daniel was sitting in my driveway, and I had already seen the documents. Daniel, I said calmly. Did he sound like he was warning you or threatening you? She answered immediately. Warning. Then she paused, but it didn't feel like concern. I nodded, because warnings from people like David usually carried two meanings. One spoken, one implied. What else did he say? I asked. She hesitated again. Then quietly, he asked if I still had anywhere to stay. That made me look at her, and I said I was figuring it out. Did he offer help? She shook her head. No. That told me something important. If David truly felt guilty, he would have offered something, even small. A hotel, temporary support, anything. Instead, he asked, then did nothing. That meant distance, control, or preparation. Daniel, I said quietly. When did he sell the townhouse? Her eyes narrowed slightly. About a month ago. A month, which meant he liquidated his own visible asset around the same time he moved her money. That wasn't coincidence. That was exit planning. You know what that means, I said. She nodded slowly. He's preparing to disappear. Or reposition. Which could be worse, because disappearing ends things. Repositioning means continuing. Then Daniel looked toward the gate suddenly. A car turned slowly onto the street. Dark gray sedan. Neither of us spoke. The car slowed slightly, then kept moving. Daniel exhaled. My pulse stayed steady. I'd learned something else over the years. Panic clouds judgment. Calm reveals patterns. I looked back at her. Daniel, there's something you need to understand. What? If David comes here, we don't argue. She nodded. We don't accuse. Okay. We let him talk. She understood immediately. Because people like David reveal more when they think they're still ahead. Mark, she said quietly. Yeah. What if he denies everything? I looked at her. Then we listened longer. She nodded. The morning sun shifted higher now, casting sharper shadows across the driveway. Time moved slowly. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Neither of us spoke much. Daniel sat quietly, scrolling through her phone occasionally. I reviewed the documents again inside. Patterns. Names. Dates. I noticed something new. One of the transfer authorizations listed a secondary contact number. I recognized the area code. Local. Very local. I stepped back outside. Daniel, did you ever call this number? She looked. No, I didn't notice it. I nodded, because that number wasn't David's. It belonged to someone else connected to the holding company, which meant David likely wasn't working alone. Then, a car slowed outside the gate. This time it didn't pass. It stopped. Black SUV. Clean. Tinted windows. Daniel stood slowly. Her face tightened. That's his. The engine turned off. Driver door opened. David stepped out. Same calm posture. Same composed expression. But he paused when he saw Daniel already inside the gate. Then he looked up and saw me. For just a fraction of a second, his expression changed. Not panic. Not anger. Calculation. Then he walked toward the gate slowly. I didn't move. Neither did Daniel. He stopped outside, looked at both of us, then gave a small, controlled smile. Well, his voice was calm, measured. I was hoping we could all talk. I stepped closer to the intercom. You drove a long way for that. I asked. He glanced at the cameras briefly, then back at me. Some conversations deserve face-to-face. I studied him. He looked composed. Too composed, which meant he believed he still controlled the narrative about the holding company. I asked calmly. That's when the smile faded. Just slightly. He hadn't expected me to say that first. Daniel showed you, he said. Not a question. Confirmation. I nodded. She did. He exhaled quietly, then did something interesting. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, I was going to explain. Daniel's voice tightened. Explain what, David? He looked at her, then back at me, and said calmly, You both think I stole the money. Neither of us spoke, because he hadn't denied it yet. Then he added, But that's not what happened. I pressed the intercom. Then what happened? He looked directly at me and said something that made the entire situation shift again. I moved it before someone else could take it. The driveway fell silent, because that meant one thing. There was another layer, another threat, another reason, and David had just opened the door to it. Neither Daniel nor I spoke. David stood outside the gate, calm as ever, like he had just offered a reasonable explanation instead of something that complicated everything. I moved it before someone else could take it. That wasn't a denial. That was justification. I stepped closer to the intercom. Who? I asked. David's eyes shifted briefly to Daniel, then back to me. You, he said. The word landed quietly. Daniel turned toward me immediately. What? I didn't react outwardly, but inside, I felt something settle into place. Because that wasn't panic talking. That was strategy. Explain, I said calmly. David nodded slightly, like he expected that. Before the divorce finalized, I reviewed Daniel's financial position, the assets she was about to receive, the liquidity, the exposure. He paused. You were already restructuring your own finances. That was true. I had moved accounts months before the divorce. Quietly, legally, and intentionally. That's not unusual, I said. No, he agreed. But what was unusual was the timing. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? David kept his voice steady. Mark shifted his long-term investments, liquidated 2 mid-risk accounts, and closed his advisory relationship, all before the divorce ruling. Daniel looked at me. I met her eyes calmly, because none of that was secret, but it was deliberate. David continued. I assumed he was preparing to protect assets, maybe restructure ownership, possibly reposition funds in ways that would be harder to trace. I didn't interrupt, because I wanted to hear how far he'd go. So you stole my money? Daniel asked quietly. I didn't steal anything, David replied. You transferred everything into a company you controlled. Yes, without telling me. Yes, Daniel's voice tightened. That's stealing. David shook his head. No, it's safeguarding. Daniel let out a short, disbelieving breath. By bankrupting me? David looked at her calmly. You weren't bankrupt. Her jaw tightened. I lost my house. Because you kept spending like nothing changed. That hit, because it wasn't entirely wrong. Daniel had maintained her lifestyle. I saw her shoulders tense. You could have told me, she said. David nodded. I considered it. Then why didn't you? He looked at me. Because I wasn't sure how much Mark had already positioned. The silence deepened again. I stepped forward slightly. So you used her money to create assets, I said. Yes. Without her knowledge. Yes. And sold one of those assets to me. David nodded once. Yes. Daniel looked between us, confused. Why would you sell to Mark? David answered calmly. Because he pays attention. I felt the weight of that. He asked questions during the closing. David continued. About the company's formation. About ownership layers. Most buyers don't. That was true. I always asked. And I asked. David exhaled slowly. I wanted to see if you recognized the structure. Daniel looked at him. You tested him. Yes. She stared at him. You gambled my money to test him? David didn't flinch. I converted volatile funds into real assets. The house was one of them. Daniel shook her head slowly. This is insane. David finally softened slightly. Daniel, the money isn't gone. She froze. What? He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder. I liquidated one property to maintain operational flexibility. The rest are still held. He slid the folder through the gate slot. I picked it up. Property list. 3 addresses. Commercial unit. 2 rental homes. All under the same holding company. All purchased within the last 2 months. Daniel leaned closer. You bought properties? Yes. With my money. Yes. Her voice softened. They're still there. Yes. She exhaled slowly. Relief mixed with anger. But why not tell me? She asked again. David finally answered honestly. Because you trusted me more than you trusted Mark. That landed hard. Daniel didn't respond. David looked at me again, and I wanted to see how you'd respond when you discovered the connection. I held his gaze. And he nodded slightly. You didn't panic. You checked documents. You waited. That told me I was right. Right about what? David's voice lowered slightly. That you weren't a threat. Daniel looked confused again. What threat? David paused, then said quietly, Your divorce lawyer. Daniel blinked. What? He contacted me 2 months ago. David continued. Asked about your financial restructuring. Suggested additional opportunities involving your accounts. Daniel's face tightened. You're saying he tried to? Yes, David said calmly. He assumed you were vulnerable. He wanted access. The silence turned heavy again. I felt something settle, because that actually made sense. Predatory advisors often appear after divorces, and Daniel had been newly liquid. David continued. I moved everything before he could position himself. Daniel stared at him. And the foreclosure? David looked at her. You refused to adjust your expenses. I couldn't release funds without exposing the structure. That was harsh, but not entirely wrong. Daniel sat slowly on the bench, processing, angry, relieved, confused. I flipped through the folder again. Everything looked structured, careful, legal. And then I noticed one final document. Ownership distribution. I looked closer, then up at David. You split ownership, I said. He nodded. Yes. Daniel looked up. Split. I turned the page toward her. 3 names. Daniel, myself, and David. Daniel frowned. Why is Mark on this? David answered quietly. Because he unknowingly stabilized the first asset. That allowed the rest to proceed. Daniel looked at me, then back at David. So, her voice softened. I didn't lose everything. David shook his head. No. She exhaled slowly. And the house. I spoke this time. You lost that one. She nodded, but her shoulders had relaxed. Not everything was gone. Just changed. David stepped back slightly. I know this wasn't handled perfectly, he said. Daniel gave a tired, quiet laugh. That's one way to put it. Then David looked at me. You did recover, Mark. I met his gaze calmly. Yes. He nodded once, then turned back toward his SUV. Call me when you're ready to restructure properly, he said to Daniel. She nodded faintly. He left quietly. No drama, no raised voices, just the sound of his engine fading down the street. Daniel sat quietly beside me. After a long moment, she said softly, You really did recover. I looked at the house, the quiet street, the folder in my hands. I didn't recover, I said. I rebuilt. She nodded slowly, then stood. I should go. I didn't stop her. She walked to the gate, paused, then turned back once. I was wrong in court. I didn't answer. She gave a small, tired smile, then left quietly. I locked the gate, walked back inside, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel unfamiliar anymore. It felt earned.